Hello and welcome back to yet another tutorial for the Grow Grammar series. This is on Book 2, looking at Unit 6, Active and Passive Voice. This can be quite a tricky concept to grasp, so it might take a little while. It might take a few goes at the activities before you get this one right. Let's have a look at what we need to focus on. Active voice occurs when the subject of the sentence is the doer of the action. So for this you really need to know what the subject is for each of the sentences as well. And here's our first example. Alex gave an oral presentation. So here we can see that Alex is the doer and giving the oral presentation is the action. So in this case it would be active voice. So this occurs when the subject, Alex, is the doer of the action, gave the oral presentation. To find out whether a sentence is active or passive, ask who or what before the main verb. Who gave? In this case, Alex gave. Alex is the subject of the verb and also the doer of the action. Now when it comes to passive voice, this occurs when the grammatical subject of the verb is the object of the action. So we've got some different terminology here. You need to know what the subject and object within the sentence is. For example, here we've got an oral presentation was given by Alex. So in this case, this occurs when the grammatical subject of the verb is the object of the action. So we know it's the same information, just in a different order. What was given? Still the oral presentation. So we can still highlight that or circle it in this instance. The oral presentation is a grammatical object of the verb. It is not the doer of the action. It is done to. The verb is in the passive voice. You can often recognize the passive in sentences by the construction auxiliary plus main verb plus by. Here we can see was given by. So we've got that sort of scenario. In most cases, the active voice is preferable because it is direct and concise. So usually this is how we would write and how we would speak. This can sometimes feel a little bit convoluted. There's a little bit too much going on. However, sometimes passive voice, that should say voice, is required for reports, such as science or laboratory reports, to maintain a tone of impartiality or objectivity. So in some instances, you might need to write in passive voice. And here's our sentence. The compound solution was tested with an increased temperature of 30 degrees Celsius. In that context, the use of passive voice makes a lot of sense. So there will be times when both are appropriate. Let's have a look at some of the examples and see if we can't get you going. In this first one here, circle the subject and underline the verb in the sentences. So we're going back to some of those key words from our explanation. And if we have a look here, all we need to do is look for the subject. And in this first one, William Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. William Shakespeare is performing the action. And then we underline the verb so we know that wrote is the verb. So it's very simple. If we have a look at the next one, Romeo and Juliet was written by Shakespeare. If we have a look at the verb first, because that's easy, was written would be our verbal was, and then we've got the subject is Romeo and Juliet. Now, all we are doing is looking at the subject and verb in the sentences. You're not actually identifying, well, not really, identifying which is active and passive in this case. So go through and see if you can highlight the verbs and the subject in each of those sentences. It's not until you get to question number 2 here that you have to work out which are passive and which are active. And it wants us to really look at which ones are in passive voice. So don't forget, we've got to go back to our previous slide perhaps. Passive voice occurs when the subject of the verb is the object of the action. So it's almost like the person performing the action comes after the verb. So let's have a look. In our cases here, if we look at A, William Shakespeare performed the action wrote, that's not an example of passive voice. Romeo and Juliet was, we've got our verb here, let me just get my pen working, oops, was is our verb, and then we've got our then we've got the person performing the action. So in this case, it would have to be passive voice. And then you can go through and check which other sentences in this list are also in passive voice by looking at the rule that was explained in the first slide. In the take it further, you've got to add a little bit more detail here. In fact, you've got to do some writing of your own. The task reads, the following sentences are in the passive voice. Rewrite them in the active voice. So you've got to rewrite them all. The first one here, he was seen immediately by the doctor. This one can be rewritten as, the doctor saw him immediately. So as you can see, what we've done is we have to shift. We have to find the verb in the sentence and make sure the doctor comes before the verb. So the doctor saw him immediately. Same for this next one. Let's see how this one works. The acid was added to the beaker by a careful student. Now we know that the careful student is performing the action, adding the acid. So we need to change this so that it reads, a careful student added the acid to the beaker. So the person performing the action is before the verb. So you need to go through and do that for the remaining sentences there. See how you go. This is an ETV production brought to you by Prindiville Catholic College.